So welcome. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm here with Chip Paucek, who's the Chief Executive of 2U, an online education company. And I wanted to just start by asking you what 2U does.
So we partner with top universities to build what we think is the world's best digital education. Started the company 10 years ago. People thought this was a totally crazy idea because the elite schools weren't doing anything online. And we allow a great school like Yale or Berkeley or Georgetown, those are an example of some of our clients, to power an experience that is equal to, and one could even argue maybe better than the campus experience for both graduate programs like a Master of Business Administration, but also for programs that you wouldn't think you could even do online, like a Master of Science in Midwifery, where you're delivering babies. And so 2U provides all of the software and a bunch of tech-enabled services together, and we sort of power the experience over a very, very long contract, doing it in a way that I would argue is not your grandfather's version of online education. So the student is getting the exact same degree that they would on campus, but doing it at a quality level that makes somebody like Harvard or Yale, two of our clients, be super interested in doing this.
So yeah, let's talk about the kind of real world experiences you're talking about. So let's take the example of midwifery. My mum is actually a midwife.
There you go.
I'm sure that there was part of her that would have liked a less stressful experience of learning to deliver babies online, but I presume you don't do that. How do you combine them?
Clearly your mom would agree that you don't want to go to a midwife that delivered the virtual baby. So 2U has a very large team of people that work to find a local clinical placement where you go and you actually assist in the delivery of, in that particular program, 30 babies to graduate from that program. So really large clinical placement network to not just do things like midwifery, but one of our degrees is a Doctor of Physical Therapy with the University of Southern California, the #1 school in that discipline. So physical therapy at the doctorate level is not something you would immediately think of doing online. But the reality is, if done right, you can build something that is extremely high quality. Now, they're all a bit hybrid, so students do, #1, see each other face-to-face. So even when you're doing the instruction component, it looks a little bit like the beginning of the Brady Bunch, not to date myself, or like a Google Hangout, and you're live with your faculty member, and then you consume a bunch of content interactively on your own time, and then, as your mom would appreciate, you go in and do your clinical placement. So one of our programs, as an example, is producing 5% of the United States social workers in that one program. So it's getting quite large, but it's all done with this really intense, high-quality clinical component that you just wouldn't think of when you think of online education. So we're sort of breaking a lot of the preconceived notions. Online ed, that's my biggest problem as CEO, is that people immediately think online education is not very good. And for a lot of its history, it really wasn't. And so we're breaking down a lot of barriers, which makes it really hard to do.
Yeah, let's take a look at that history, because as you say, it's not your grandfather's online education. I'm not sure my grandfather had an online education, but it became very controversial because people thought people were not engaged in these courses. They weren't learning as much. They were often dropping out, and that this promise that no one would have to go around the other side of the world to an elite university, that everything could come from your bedroom was failing. So you talk about having 3 waves of online education.
That's right.
What are they?
So I would argue that we're in the 3rd wave. The first wave was for-profit education. And we thought way back in 2008 the technology was there to do something great. But the story of 2U is really the story of institutional will, of a great university being willing to effectively end the segregation of the online environment, end the segregation of the online student, make them equal to the campus student. That means the same rights and therefore the same responsibilities. So same admissions criteria. And 2U does all of the marketing for the school. So that's actually quite complicated from a business standpoint. But the reality is, when you offer the same rights and same responsibilities and you power it with this kind of intense faculty involvement, what you get out of it is our retention rates across our programs is somewhere between 83 and 89%, which, when you think about that, that's not what you've heard of when you think of online education. So then we got to the 2nd wave. So if we went from for-profit to the 2nd wave, I would argue, which was a bit more of a toe in the water. Now, the world was pretty obsessed with it for a while. It was called the Massive Open Online Course. And we were around during this whole time period, and very candidly, we really couldn't get the time of day because we were behind the scenes. But the massive online courses clearly have value to the world, but I would argue we're a bit more of a toe in the water than the university offering its full experience to a student, whether it be a degree program or an individual course. So it's my belief that we're in the 3rd wave, which is the great schools. The reality is, when people talk about, the sleeping giants are starting to wake up, no, they're awake. So my partners are some of the best schools in the world that have really the richest tradition. I mean, what's kind of fascinating about higher ed compared to like the companies in this conference, my youngest university partner is 12 years older than Walt Disney. Companies don't last this long. So if you look at the last 20 years and you go back 20 years, the list of the top 20 companies are all different. Higher ed is filled with institutions that have a tremendous impact on individual people's lives. There's no greater path for social mobility than attending like you did Oxford. I mean, it's incredible. Oxford 1096. I know that because they're one of our clients. So 800 years on Coca-Cola. Like, you think about what that means. Now, more importantly, people aren't going to Coca-Cola to get married. Like, people form a permanent relationship with our great schools. It has such an impact on their lives. So when these real schools start doing it and taking the online environment the way our partners are, I think you can ask yourself some fundamental questions. Like, why should you as a consumer pick up your life, quit your job, and move to attend a great school if you don't have to and you can get everything you would have gotten by opening your laptop? So we think we're at, really, I mean, I feel very blessed to be CEO of a company that is the market leader in a new space that has tremendous amounts of organic growth potential, because it's kind of a seminal moment in higher ed's history where the great schools are starting to adopt the online environment in a very real way. And pretty proud of our 1,900 people that are powering it. So
you can get everything you can except perhaps real marriage prospects, because those are reasons why people go.
Believe it or not, we have a couple of 2U marriages.
Oh, really?
So what ends up happening is, so by the way, just to be clear, I graduated from one of our programs. And so I did
Which one?
The University of North Carolina Chapel Hill MBA program. So if I could I talk about that for just a second?
Yeah.
So I'm a first generation college graduate, come from an incredible family, but come from GW, George Washington University could not have changed my life more. Met my wife there 26 years ago, still together today. It just completely changed my life. It opened my world to something that, it just blew my mind. Coming from Florida, I'd never seen snow until I got to DC. Now, why do I tell you this? Not to play the violin for me. Like, higher ed changed my life and changes a ton of people's lives. And the reality is what 2U allows you to do is experience that in a very personal way at the quality level that is representative of these schools. So I wanted an MBA. Now, you say, well, you run a successful company. This is my third venture-backed startup, and I know we're going to talk about this. The only one that worked, so I can tell you all about the notion of failing forward. Very hard. But the fact is, I wanted an MBA. It was a personal goal. So I enrolled in our program. Both my board and my team, and more importantly, my wife, thought I was a little crazy. I didn't do it to talk about it. We didn't do any press on it because I was terrified I was going to fail. But I graduated. And so I can tell you all about the experience. And what's amazing is you meet people very personally. So the reason the marriage is not unusual is you're in class. Now, the one funny thing is when you show up physically, because what happens is you go to class, and then they do these things called immersions. And you go, and there are another 300 of your fellow classmates dipped in the Carolina blue attending Chapel Hill at this immersion. And so you get to do the physical stuff. When you meet virtually all the time, the one thing you don't know is how tall somebody is. But beyond that, you really get to know them. And so once you meet physically, you form these incredible relationships. And I saw it firsthand. Like, one of my classmates was a Shell oil engineer stationed in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico on an oil rig, getting his MBA. One of my classmates was the head of ER of the Southeast General Washington, D.C. hospital. Like, these incredible people I got to know. So, from my experience, it's super intimate. It's a much more intimate form of online education. And believe it or not, that causes people to indeed have relationships and get married in some cases.
So it seems like the new model is very much a hybrid model.
It is.
I interviewed a company here recently called Mission U. Have you heard of them?
So Adam Braun is a very good friend of mine, and just for the record, I'm an investor personally in Mission U. So love
There
Adam.
I'm helping you promote in every way.
I didn't know you were going to ask me.
Yeah. So their model is basically saying that university is too expensive,
Sure.
and that you have to focus instead on these year-long courses where they're focused on very much in-need skills. Like at the moment, they're doing data science.
They are.
Is that an opposition to the kind of thing that you do? In that
You might wonder, how do you reconcile 2U with being an investor in Mission U? And in my opinion, it's a story of and, not or. Like, the world needs more education opportunities. Really, the problem for America with the first wave is too many people getting a degree that really didn't mean anything. Like, it's not good for the world that the proprietary sector did not have the kind of outcomes that you need. What we need more educational opportunities for people. And so one of the reasons we acquired a company out of Cape Town, South Africa called Get Smarter is they do what 2U does, but they do it for short courses instead of for degrees. So if I'm sort of at the side of a very long commitment and a very intense commitment to get a doctor of physical therapy for a very expensive price, because the prices are all the same price as the campus programs, the entire world can't access that, right? So Get Smarter offers individual courses on things like, from your alma mater, Oxford blockchain. And while everybody loves to talk about blockchain, most people really don't really know what it is. And so that's an excellent example of an 8-week course on blockchain offered by one of the world's best schools. And so it's my belief that there's a very big market out there. And one of the reasons I think Mission U is a smart idea is we need more educational opportunity, not less.
What about K-12? I did a piece earlier this year on personalized education. It seems something that Silicon Valley and especially Mark Zuckerberg's very interested in. What do you think the opportunities are there?
Well, I mean, what's crazy about, from an ed tech standpoint, we were a tough IPO. Why? So we IPO'd 4 years ago, and it's gone great. I mean, we've done very well as a public company, but getting public was tough. Why? Ed tech does not have that many success stories, unfortunately. And what's strange about that is that the percent of GDP that goes to education worldwide and how few large companies there are is strange. Regulated markets, very difficult. And one of the things I would say, K-12, we're in higher ed, we've chosen to be in higher ed, and we love the market, and we think we have a long runway in higher ed. So we're not in K-12. But I ran Hooked on Phonics before this. And before that, I produced a PBS television show that was called Standard Deviance. It was middle school, high school, college courses taught by comedians, including a bunch of people that are now famous celebrities. Kerry Washington, Mike Birbiglia, TJ Miller from Silicon Valley. So they were all in my show. So I lived K-12. Well, it was a great show. The show was great, but ultimately the business failed. So that's a whole story. But the fact is, K-12, we think there is huge value. And what I would say to the people in the audience that are startup founders or people that are listening is tackle the big problems. Like, there's too many people in ed tech that are going after, that end up creating a feature and not a company. Like, there are big problems. So I give the companies in K-12 that are going after the big problems, or what Mark Zuckerberg is doing. So like the head of the Chan Zuckerberg education side is Jim Shelton, who actually was a 2U employee, believe it or not, and is a good friend of mine. I had dinner with him last night. Like, go after those really big problems because we need it for the world.
Yeah. And so let's talk about your experience with failure.
Oh,
you
boy.
seem to not want to glamorize it as much as many people do around here.
So, I mean, when people, particularly out here in the Valley, we're DC based, so sometimes, we're not in the mix. When you talk about failing forward and failing fast, I do feel like 99% of those people haven't failed. It's really hard to do. So running my first company for 10 years and getting 8 years in and walking in one day and laying off 80% of my company in a day, if you go through that and it doesn't change you, you have no brain or soul. Very, very difficult experience. And so what I take away from it is not that there's some inherent brilliant value in failure. It's startups are unbelievably hard. And the idea that this has now worked, and what's happened to 2U, I mean, God bless, I feel genuinely very blessed to be in this seat right now, running this company with the kind of runway we have. But I've learned the hard way that it's not about me. It's about the team. And that sounds pithy, but it is so unbelievably true. And so, I kind of had to learn it the hard way. If I could take my 46-year-old and put it back in my 22-year-old when I started that first company, it would be focus, focus, focus. Like, the power of focus. I tell when I mentor startup founders, I can't tell you what idea is going to work because I feel like people oversteer on the idea and they oversteer on execution. And you think, what's left? Well, it's the combination. It's the execution through the maze of challenges that you will have as a startup founder. But what I can tell you is if you try everything like I did, it will fail. So, young entrepreneurs are wired like, I'm going to date myself here, but the movie Poltergeist, when the little woman is like, Carol Ann, don't go into the light, like the light is the new thing. You can't help yourself. You're wired. And so you just go for it. And unfortunately, I went for it way too many times. And ultimately, it cost me my company, really. So it took me till this one to really figure out the power of that sort of driving focus. And until we acquired Get Smarter, for our entire decade, we have, like my first 5 years at 2U, we ran 3 university programs, USC, Georgetown, and Chapel Hill. We really didn't start substantial expansion until we were, halfway through our now decade.
Wow. And another word that you don't really like is popular around here, disrupt. Why don't you like that?
Well, it's not we don't like it. So I feel like, overselling the value of disrupting everything. First of all, it's not quite a nice thing, right? You have these great faculty members as examples that you don't get to Berkeley without being pretty spectacular, by the way. And the freedom of thought that occurs at a high quality institution has inherent value to the world. And so I feel like we're proving that when you partner with the schools and you gradually get the faculty to learn that, it's not about, people say, oh, they're afraid to change, they need to be disrupted, they're afraid to change. No, it's not a fear of change, it's a fear of loss. Like they've done something exceptionally well for a really, really, really long time, and they've changed a lot of people's lives in the process. So it's our belief that, sort of powering that system and helping them see the path, but I'll tell you what, when you get them involved and they really sort of buy in, it's unbelievably powerful what can happen. So I feel like there's a really interesting way to think about disruption in industries that are either regulated markets like education or difficult markets like education where there's a lot of institutional forces. So, it's our belief that notion of the third wave will extend to a bunch of different industries where you've got more entrenched players. And therefore, it might be a little bit less about fundamental disruption.
So you focused the company. You made friends and won over these people rather than disrupting them. And then you took it public. What did you learn from that?
Well, I feel like, we have a very traditional story. We weren't a unicorn. Our Series D post-money was $280 million. We IPO'd with no perfect comps. I give our bankers, and people love to give bankers grief, but Goldman Sachs and Credit Suisse did a great job for 2U. Why? Because there was no comparability. Like there's no Salesforce, Workday, Marketo, Tableau. Like that's what the street wants. Our business model, I didn't say this, we take more than 60% of the university's tuition over a 10-year or longer contract. So there's really nothing quite like us in the market. And then ed tech in general doesn't have a bunch of big wins. So, we IPO'd a little under 500 million. Now today, the market cap is somewhere above 3 billion because we've delivered 15 consecutive quarters in a row. Being public has made 2U a better company. We are more predictable, we have better bones. I started saying that, and some of my founder friends looked at me sideways for a while until Mark Benioff and Mark Zuckerberg both started saying it, and then I looked a little smarter. But I genuinely believe it has made us a better company. And I don't feel that I've sacrificed the long-term sort of perspective. People say, oh, quarter. I feel like that's just part of the deal. You have to understand the quarters matter, but you can keep people focused on the long term. And I feel like we've done that pretty well. So it's been a good run for us. We IPO'd in 2014, and we've had a really good run as a public company. So I do think it's allowed us to preserve our culture. So our partners, you've one of two choices. You're either going to sell or go public. So our partners very much were on the side of wanting us to go public because they wanted us to sort of be able to retain the company's ethos.
And you have some fantastic people on your board and actually quite a fantastically diverse board as well.
Thank you. I'm pretty proud of that. So we have one of the more diverse boards in the entire market. So we have 3 women and 4 people of color. We just added Valerie Jarrett to the board last week, so that made some news. The former advisor to President Obama. We have Sally Paucek on our board. She's been a bit of a leading light, sort of North Star for me on the side of dealing with the market and understanding how to deal with the market. One of the reasons Valerie joined the company is, in her words, she said, when I came to visit 2U, it looked like America. And, I'm proud of that. Like, we need that diversity to be what we want to be. We need that sort of input from all of those different angles. I feel like all the research proves the company is better for it. And the reality is life's too short. Like, I want that I want our company to look and feel like America. So
that's a great note to almost end it on, but we now have to play overrated or underrated.
Uh-oh. Here we go.
Bitcoin.
Ha, Bitcoin. Can I say underrated but overvalued?
No.
Is that okay?
No, No. Okay, you can say that if you explain yourself in one sentence or less.
Well, I mean, underrated, like clearly changing the world, but I think that there's a smaller, like the world doesn't get how big of a deal it is. And by the way, you should take our Oxford blockchain course. So there you go, that was good. But the world doesn't understand how big of a deal it is, but there's clearly a group of people that are a little obsessed with it and therefore driving insane values right now.
Okay, well the next one is blockchain, and you're not allowed to answer with a third promo
Underrated.
of that course. Underrated. Okay. AI.
Underrated.
Facebook.
Oh yeah. Company-wise, underrated. Personally, over.
Okay, interesting.
Boy, is that a punt?
So you think that the company is capable of
A company's unbelievable. I mean, it's remarkable.
running the world? Yeah, yeah, that seems to be the ambition. Google.
Underrated. We're a huge client.
Autonomous cars.
Huh. Over.
You don't think they're going to be on the streets anytime
No,
soon?
I do, but it annoys me.
You're a big driver?
Yeah. I like driving.
Okay. Uber.
Over.
Is that the company or the product?
Both.
Interesting. Massive open online courses.
Over.
Course.
With emphasis.
Yeah, I got the emphasis. Coursera.
Over. Now we're getting a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, now I'm just going to go down a list of your competitors. No, we're not. MIT.
Under.
Well, that's not surprising at all. All right, well, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.